Finally, it is game week. Let's play some football. Michigan gets underway to defend its national championship against Fresno State on Saturday night. And I've got some thoughts next on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Gets caught.
Hey, they said you can't beat Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue. I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast, and it is finally game week, although I have to tell you, for the first time, I'd be okay with extending the offseason a little bit longer. I've never said that before, but I'm pretty content, you know? I'm excited. I'm always excited for a new Michigan football season, but maybe I'm getting old and getting soft, but winning the Natty, in the way we won it, 15-0, just throat punching people on a weekly basis right in the mouth, beating Ohio State, Alabama, and Washington to close it out. I don't know. And the end of the era of college football as we've known it and loved it. We may love this new era more. I don't know. We don't know. I don't think there's any guarantee there. It was a storybook ending. Could not have been any better. An incredibly likable team. Of well-spoken young men. And one of the great players in Michigan history as the coach and the guy who's the guiding light. I've never felt like this before at the start of a season. I have no nerves, no angst, nothing. I'm flatline. Normally I'm the football fan version of tweaking about this time of year, but I'm good. Whatever the outcome is, we're good. Hard to top what we did last year. I hope we win every game. I suspect we won't. Suspect we might even lose a few times, but okay. Yeah, okay. We won the Natty. Can't ever take that away. Most fan bases in most sports never get a chance to experience ever the season that we just got to experience last year. So I'm completely content, which means I'm going to project now. And I'm going to give a bit of a contrarian take. I actually think it might be to our advantage that we are playing so many guys who either didn't play last year or played in a reserve role. Here's why. And I go back to 2014 Ohio State. Winning the Natty that year, beating Alabama like we did, beating the champions of the Pac-12 for the championship like we did. The Ohio State and Michigan, we were the bookend national champions of the college football playoff era. Okay? And everybody on that Ohio State team came back the next year. Like the entire team came back. And they were really good. They ended up going 11-1, but they didn't cover a lot of point spreads. They weren't as dominant. And I just think when you've got that many guys coming back that are that high profiled in the NFL draft, it's just human nature to be saying, you know, do I really want to balls out against Indiana? They almost lost to Indiana that year, by the way, if you go back and watch. So I think there might be an advantage. I mean, look, if we're this way as fans, I mean, I kind of posted a version of what I said to you guys on my X account. A lot of Michigan fans chimed in and said, yeah, right there with you. I mean, if we're feeling that as fans, imagine if you're one of these players. Imagine if Blake Corum and a bunch of these guys who still had eligibility because of COVID, imagine if they all come back. I mean, you've been fighting off injuries and everything else. I mean, you've already won it all. Are you really going balls out every week and risking an injury in the NFL draft that could, set your family back a generation? I mean, that's got to be somewhere in the back of your head, right? The more I think about it, I think this might be the ideal situation. We're going to have a lot of young men who saw what it took to win the last few years, and a lot of them who played hugely contributing roles, the Josiah Stewarts, the Mason Grahams, the Kenneth Grants, the Giovanni El Hadis, the Donovan Edwards. But they really weren't the centerpiece player yet. And they're either going to be for the first time or they're going to fully become what they were kind of starting to become last year. And that leaves a little bit more fire in the belly to prove, hey, if you're Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, you saw Chris Jenkins get picked in the second round of the draft, and you're thinking Mozzie Smith first round the year before, you're like, hey, man, we got to measure up to that, show that that's who we are, right? On the other hand, if Chris Jenkins comes back, he's like, I can make sure I don't get hurt. I mean, everybody wants to win, but you've already won the Natty. You've given Michigan everything that you can give. And I think at that point in time, salute. Great. Thank you. Go blue and go make that money, man. You earned it. And now let's give some other young men who have something to prove. A little eye of the tiger, a little fire in the belly. They've got an NFL draft stock that they want to build upon. They've got a name they want to make for themselves. They've been a part of this culture. They've seen what it takes to win. And I think that's how you stop complacency from setting in. Or I'm just completely coming up with a preseason spin to make myself feel better. But I don't really think I'm doing that because nothing could make me feel better than the season we just had. I'm good. I'm totally chill. We're 7-5. I'm good. We're 11-1, 12-0. Cool. Great. Love it. But nothing can top last year. And so it's going to take quite a bit for that buzz to wear off. What do you think? Let us know here in the comments section. And I know some of you are going to be like, well, that's what losers say. No, that's what national champions say. National champions say that, So that's what we say. Yeah, maybe if your team gets to a bowl game or something, you can come back and start lecturing us about complacency. But we're national champs, so we get to do that. So let us know what you think in the comments section. We will analyze the opener against Fresno State. I think it's really all about the performance at quarterback in this game. We'll get into that and more with Mark Rogers here next. Don't forget that you can support what we do here at Michigan Podcast by joining the Thank You Club for just $10 a month at our Patreon page at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. But here's the thing. This will be the best $10 a month you've ever spent. You can see right there my Major League Baseball picks, which have absolutely been crushing it all season long. Our college football picks went 1-0-1 in week 0. We've got all of my futures bets I've made for the upcoming football season up there as well. So this is more than going to make your money back for $10 a month if you support us on our Patreon page at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Again, that's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Our football picks are rolling out now. You don't want to miss it. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Thanks to all of you that support us year-round right here on our Patreon page at Michigan Podcast. And thank you, too, if you decide to do the same for just $10 a month at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. All right, let's find out what our one and perhaps only Bucknut friend, reasonable Bucknut we know, has to say as Michigan embarks upon the defense of its first outright national championship since 1948. first share of the national championship since 1997. Mark Rogers, good to see you again over there at the Voice of College Football. Check out his page. So much great coverage of college football year-round right here on YouTube as well. Mark, how are you, brother? You ready to go?
I'm ready for week one, Steve. We got a little taste last Saturday with a top 10 upset already on the books, and two near double-digit upsets with SMU pulling out a game. So there were 18 of those last year, and we almost had 2 in week 0.
That Georgia Tech-Florida State game was a heck of a game, man. And that second half with those two quarterbacks, I mean, some of the plays Haynes King made there, either in the pocket or to escape pressure and get out of the pocket. I mean, what was it? 3 consecutive fourth down throws that DJ Uiagalelei made as well. I mean, for a first game of the year, right out of the gates, and in that setting as well with that crowd, that felt like a mid-season, late-season game. That was a ton of fun. So if last week when the underdogs covered every game in week 0 is any indication of what we're looking forward to, look out. So let's talk about Michigan opening up on Saturday night against Fresno State. And for people that maybe don't know, maybe if you're younger than Gen X like you and I mean, going back to, is it Kevin Sweeney who I'm thinking of in the mid-'80s who threw for like 10,000 yards at Fresno State? Yeah. And that was back when there used to be a game called the California Raisin Bowl that was kind of the miniature Rose Bowl, that all the best teams, what we call now Group of 5 that were in the West Coast were in this like PCA conference, right? And then there was the MAC champion, okay? And that was kind of a mini Rose Bowl where those 2 conference champions would play in, like the earliest bowl game of the year. Am I remembering that right from back in the day, right?
Yeah, and Sweeney made his way to the Dallas Cowboys and started to come.
Correct. And so essentially, other than I would say Boise State, Fresno State's been the dominant Group of 5 program in the sport, and really was Boise State before Boise State. Really, I mean, they had a number 1 overall pick in the draft came out of Fresno State, so they had put a ton of guys in the NFL. They have been a quality program. They've won at a bunch of big venues. Now they're losing their coach, Jeff Tedford, but they are bringing back a ton of production. I think they'll play very hard for the new coach on Saturday night. I think Michigan has a ton of questions on offense to answer. I mean, I could see this being a 28-10, 31-14 kind of a game, and Fresno State's never going to win it, but Michigan never really, puts the gas down, maybe gets a late turnover or something and, to make the score look more comfortable. But that's kind of what I'm expecting to see Saturday night. But what do you think?
Well, I'm going to play off the Tedford narrative of this, and it's unfortunate, of course. He's an excellent coach, and for a second time in the last 3 or 4 years, he's had to step down because of medical concerns. But he built a winner at Fresno State, rebuilt a winner at Fresno State, had a nice stay at Cal as well, and he's a bit of a quarterback whisperer. Jake Hayner's their most recent, highly successful quarterback who had remarkable stats. And they've got Mikey Keene coming in from UCF, who's already posted 1 season at Fresno State. So I was just thinking that, with Jeff Tedford preparing this team, building a game plan, and also being on the sideline, maybe making it just a little bit more interesting for a possible, I'm not going to call upset bid, but like you say, maybe a bit scarier for the Maize and Blue, maybe a la, what year was that, 2019 against Army with the last-second field goal miss? That was something else. Listen to these scores just here in the last few years, Steve, since 2019. Fresno State is 4-5 against Power 5 competition. In 19, they lost to a USC team that went to the Holiday Bowl by a touchdown. They lost to that Minnesota PJ Fleck team, the one that went 11-2. They lost to them in double overtime, 38-35. They lost to an Oregon team that was in playoff contention that played in the Pac-12 championship game on the road in Autzen by a touchdown. That was a last-second win by Oregon. They beat the UCLA team that went 9-4 with Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback. But they beat them at the Rose Bowl, 40-37. Oregon State, that Jonathan Smith 10-3 team, they lost to them 35-32 on a touchdown in the last few seconds. They beat Purdue and Arizona State last year. They have walked into some places, and they've got to go on the road to do this work too, of course. And they have long since, going back to the days of Pat Hill, as you established, it's been a fun football program to follow that stood up to a lot of giants consistently through the decades.
There's not really, because, there's this idea that, this is a young Michigan team. It's actually not. It doesn't return a lot of production, but a lot of these guys have been in the program 3-4 years. I saw a graphic. We'll have it on the show here in the segment after you, but the vast majority of guys that are going to start for Michigan on Saturday are juniors and seniors. So they have been in this program. They have been, they've played a lot of snaps, even if they didn't start a lot of games, particularly on the defensive side of the football. To me, this is really just all about the quarterback position. I'm not really sure anything that we're going to see against Fresno State Saturday night is relevant at all for Texas. Even if Alex Orji gets the start, I would imagine there's all kinds of quarterback counters and everything else that you're not going to see against Fresno State, so that they don't put any of that on film against Texas. So I expect a very vanilla game plan. I don't know how much Wink Martindale's going to put up there exotically as well against Fresno, especially with the kind of defensive front that he has. So that's another reason why I think this could be kind of a stale environment as well. I think Michigan, on one hand, is kind of doing the balancing act mark of there's a lot it doesn't want to show with Texas the next week. But then on the other hand, it's got a lot of new faces on the offensive side of the football. It's got to figure out and immerse at the exact same time. So to me, unless we're in a situation like where we saw Florida State surprisingly get pushed around on both sides of the line of scrimmage by Georgia Tech, which nobody expected. If Fresno State runs for 200 yards, that would concern me, okay, for the game against Texas. But beyond that, the old Lou Holtz observation that you can have a different team in college football every week of the season, with you're dealing with young people. I don't really think there'll be that many great conclusions to draw positively or negatively about Texas, with the exception of the quarterback position. And even then, even though I think the game plan will be vanilla, if whichever one of these two guys starts, I think it'll be Orji, but I also don't think it's like been Orji the whole time and they're just being coy. I really don't think that. I think that Warren has made it closer than they wanted to, and I think Orji has let Warren make it closer than they wanted to at the exact same time. I think they wanted it to be Orji the whole time, and it just hasn't quite gotten there. And they wanted it to be JJ the whole time too, and it took the last week of camp in 2022 before he overtook, made that even a battle with Cade McNamara. So to me, it's really about getting the team set up, being able to run the offense, looking like you belong. That's really about the only thing I'm going to take from a takeaway, unless disaster happens, in terms of what it means for Texas next week. But what do you think?
Well, with what happened last weekend, I forecasted a close game and grabbed those points with Georgia Tech. They've got like a top 10 or 15 offensive line in the country. So I was not surprised by that outcome whatsoever and almost pulled the trigger on the outright upset. So I'm not going to make any kind of correlation there. In regards to the quarterback situation at Michigan, you remember better than I do 2021 and 2022. So in 21, Cade McNamara and this new passing game, and coming off of the disappointment of 2020 and not knowing that the team was going to turn out to be as good as it was, and looking at the schedule, what was everyone saying? Got to work on the passing game. Got to open it up, work on the passing game to set us up for what we're going to have to do later in the season. But Jim Harbaugh was conservative, and they stuck to their game plan and did what they did best. Then the next season, of course, was the competition between JJ and Cade. So I'm kind of drawing from those seasons. Now, Fresno State's not the pushover that some of those teams were, but still Michigan is substantially better. So what do they do with this? Is this quarterback race as close as it appears to be? Because, of course, a starter has not been has been named. So do they go with both of these quarterbacks, play them in meaningful minutes? I certainly would do that, even if I thought, if I was Sharon Moore at this point, that Alex Orji is the starter. But it took me this long to determine it. That means it was a close call, and the competition was extremely competitive. Therefore, I want to see them with the bullets firing on the field in front of 110,000 in a national TV audience. So I want to see both quarterbacks playing in meaningful situations, meaningful snaps, not necessarily 50-50, but something close to it is what I want to see.
I think the biggest issue that we have with these two quarterbacks right now, Mark, is I think with Alex Orji, the issue is that he'll try to do too much under the spotlight. Okay, we did see him and even in major games last year, including against you guys, but he didn't throw a single pass. All right, and so that he may attempt to make too much of a statement, if you will. Hey, that I this is my job and I'm ready for it, and get outside of himself when given the quality of defense and running game we're probably going to have. I don't know that we clearly don't want a quarterback doing that. I mean, this is going to be the Michigan version of trestle ball, basically. Okay. On the other hand, I think the concern with Davis Warren is that, again, we've seen him for several years now look good on State Street. Okay. In practice, spring games, but when it's, when we get out there on Stadium Drive, man, and the lights are on, not a thing, and so that's kind of the conundrum. And that's exactly why I agree with you that I would also play both quarterbacks is Alex Orji. I think you need to see him overcome a mistake and bounce back from that. Okay. What happens when you're not always going to be, well, hey, I was Bruce Feldman's like number 5 freak or something last year. So I'm just going to Cam Newton these fools. No, you're not. Okay. I mean, Cam Newton was an NFL quarterback. You're not that level of passer yet. So you're going to make mistakes, and then how do you overcome that? And then for Davis Warren, I mean, this guy has been kind of a practice player MVP for 3 years now, and just, in limited options he's had when the lights have been on, when the games count, there's been no there. And so what's that look like when he's out of a controlled environment? And there are free blitzers. He looked great thrown against free blitzers in the spring when he was wearing a colored jersey that said, "Don't take the quarterback to the ground." Not going to be wearing that jersey Saturday night. You know what I'm saying? So that's another reason why I think I agree with you that I'd play them both meaningfully anyway, even if Alex Orji is the clear starter.
Yeah, and I also want to see the running back carry distribution. I want to see what that looks like. But then there's going to have to be an interpretation of what that is, because Donovan Edwards is RB1, but there's 2 capable backups, of course, with Khalil Mullings and Benjamin Hall. However, is Edwards a true workhorse number 1 guy that's going to carry it as many times as Blake Corum would? Or even if he has been deemed that guy and proves to be that guy long term, do they really want to beat him up in game 1, or do they want to distribute the carries knowing, hey, we want to be in this thing for 16 or 17 games. So we're going to spread the wealth regardless of how confident we are that Donovan Edwards is the man.
What's the biggest overreaction take from Saturday night you suspect people are going to have after our game is over, one way or the other?
Well, it's going to be about Alex Orji and or the quarterback situation between the two. It's going to be, well, either Michigan's afraid to throw the ball because these guys aren't capable, so we didn't see them open it up. We didn't see them go downfield. Or they're indecisive. They don't know who they want to go with, and they should have had this figured out, and they both played, and neither one of them took off. Neither one of them ran with the starting job. They both threw up like a 10 for 15 or an 8 for 12. Maybe that's pushing it for Alex Orji, but an 8 for 12, let's say. So neither one of them differentiated themselves in the race, and now Sharon Moore's in a quandary because they're headed into this Texas game, and they don't have a starting quarterback, and this is going to spell doom for them.
Mark, I went back and looked, and maybe my count is off, but I counted 9 teams so far this century that have had at least 3 first-round draft picks. 9. Now, the latest Dane Brugler NFL draft ratings of top 50 prospects has 3 Michigan players in the top 30 currently rated in the first round. That's Kenneth Grant at number 30. Will Johnson and Mason Graham are both in the top 10. So we're not even counting Colston Loveland, who's likely the top tight end in the next draft. He could be a first-round pick. I think we talked last week. I think Jay Sean Barham could be a first-round pick. But let's just go with those 3 that are in Dane Brugler's top 30. Okay. Of the 9 teams I counted this year, or I counted that this century so far, have had at least 3 number 1 draft picks in the next NFL draft. Do you know how many? Do you know how many of those teams won fewer than 11 games?
None.
1.
Okay.
2006 Florida State, the only team with 3 first-round draft picks that did not win at least 11 games. The rest of them, they went 8-5. Everyone else won at least 11 games, counting the bowl game, if they had 3 first-round draft picks. Every other team. Like, it wasn't a team that went like 9-2 or 9-3. Everybody else won at least 11 games. Florida State 2006 was the only one that did not. What do you think? Your thoughts?
And considering their conference, Florida State in 2006, and their schedule, although they schedule tough outside the conference, they probably had one of the better opportunities to win 11 games because they were playing in the ACC circa 2006.
Right. So pre-Dabo, Clemson. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, my thought is that Michigan is a playoff contender. I have them going to the playoff. I believe I've got them with the same record as you do at 10-2. There's not a game that they are a substantial underdog as it stands right now. They are going to be extremely strong in all phases of the game. And outside of this quarterback situation, I see that they've got a right tackle who's emerged most likely as a redshirt freshman, and he's passed up 2 veterans along the offensive front. So I don't know if that's a good thing, that speaks to their talent acquisition and development, or that speaks to them having a bit of an issue at that spot. But I would guess, because I believe in track record and culture and all of that, and play the percentages, that like when Lincoln Riley throws out a first-year quarterback and it's Miller Moss and there are doubts and questions, I rely on the data that tells me they could have went to the transfer portal, just like Michigan could have gone to the transfer portal for a starting quarterback, but they chose not to. And Lincoln Riley develops quarterbacks. He wins Heisman trophies. He engineers prolific offenses, and he's one of the best play callers in the game. So I go with the track record and play the percentages and the probabilities. And the probabilities are that Michigan's got a good thing going, and that they've, as we have discussed, orchestrated a coaching staff with a strategy in mind to continue the culture, for lack of a better term, the continuity. And I think that was very important to them, and I think that was very wise, and I think that's going to pay off.
Let's hope you're right. Before we let you go, now that I don't know how many of the BTN Camp Tour reports you watched. I watch them all every year. But you've got your own stringers and correspondents covering these teams year-round and throughout camp anyway. So you've got your own sources and outlets for information about what's happening. Give me a Big Ten team right now that you are higher on than you originally were as you were putting together your preseason thoughts in May and June, and a Big Ten team that maybe you're lower on than you originally were when you were putting your Big Ten thoughts together in May and June, just based on whether it's injuries, developments, how things, information you've gleaned here in the last few weeks, particularly during camp.
Well, Steve, you note all those stringers and sources, but I gotta guard myself because they tend to lean in the direction of their teams. They're still fans at heart, and I don't have a show that I present every week where my analysts are not biased. And I don't say that in a critical way. They're fans at heart. That's who they are. So they tend to lean in that direction. I tend to be the barometer that pulls it back to the center. So I'm the guy that, regardless of whether you're going to attack Michigan or call them the greatest program in history, if you're a caller to my show, I'm going to pull you back to a center position. But to answer your question,
what's the fun in that, Mark? Anyway, go ahead.
That's what I do, just by play on TV. So when you're looking at somebody who's supposed to take off in this playoff, they didn't make my playoff, and that's Penn State. I know that the schedule sets up pretty well for them. As long as they win half of what are considered to be challenging games, I think they will get to the playoff. But I think that they're in trouble going to West Virginia in week 1. There was a breakdown that I will credit. I understand it's coming from a guy, Coos Walker here, that's a West Virginia guy on YouTube, who broke down the PFF starting numbers for those two teams that would show that West Virginia has better college production at all of its aggregate positions than Penn State does. Even though the total team talent rankings are number 5 versus number 30. And I know that West Virginia played them pretty well in Happy Valley last year. And now you're talking about 3 new coordinators at Penn State going to Morgantown, which is an underrated place to play against a quarterback in Garrett Green, who's better than his numbers would show from last year. So just a warning shot fired there for Penn State as a 9-point favorite in week 1. And if they trip up in that one, then look out. I think USC is the biggest wild card in the conference by far. They are my biggest wild card because I can summarize why they should take off and challenge the elite in the Big Ten, but I can also form a position as to why they're not ready for it yet. Again, Miller Moss has proven it in 1 game, but all the coaching and all the brain trust there at USC tells us that there's no way that they're going to fail at that position or in as a passing attack with 4 future NFL wide receivers at USC. And they're supposed to be, and a lot of times this is off-season and training camp rhetoric, supposed to have bulked up along the defensive front and the offensive line and be prepared.
Everybody's in the best shape of their lives. Yeah.
And all of that. So I got to discard that rhetoric coming from my USC guys to a certain extent, although Danton Lynn, a huge upgrade from Alex Grinch, who was in over his head as the DC there. However, it usually takes a defensive coordinator. I saw these numbers, of course, with Jim Knowles, but we've also seen them with Mike Elko taking over at Texas A&M kind of for a second time as he was the DC, of course, for Jimbo Fisher, that it usually, even those really good defensive coordinators, the best in the business, it's usually not year 1. It's year 2, it's year 3 to see the progression and see that real advancement into a top flight defense. So USC probably not quite there. And I know Bear Alexander is a heck of a defensive tackle, but he's one guy. And I don't know that they've got 7 or 8 like you have to have in the Big Ten, and like I know Michigan does have.
Good stuff, Mark. Let's play some games. Enough of the offseason conjecture. Let's have some actual results to break down, brother.
I'm ready. A little nervous for that Akron game, but I'm ready.
Lay in the 59.5. Thank you, Mark. Good to see you.
Thanks, Steve.
You bet. This week's X poll results, we asked you, who do you think starts at quarterback for Michigan in the opener against Fresno State? Almost said Florida State. 79% of you said Alex Orji. 17% of you believe it'll be a platoon. 4.3% of you think it'll be Davis Warren. That brings us to our feedback of the week. I mentioned this to Mark Rogers a few minutes ago. Austin Fox, for those of you that don't know, used to be a writer over at the Wolverine, where I've been subscribing since the 1990s. And he laid out, look at this graphic, Michigan's starters right now on the depth chart. So, yeah, there may not be a lot of production, but you can see right here, a lot of these are players that have spent at least a year, and most of them 3 or 4 years minimum in the program, getting developed, strength and conditioning, learning the culture, immersing themselves, assimilating into the culture, growing up, getting that grown man strength, as Jimmy used to call it. This is still a pretty experienced college football team in terms of time being developed in college football. And we'll see Michigan try to do something it's never done before, that no one's ever done before. Win 4 outright Big Ten championships in a row. This is the first time Michigan's won 3 in a row. Michigan goes for 4 in a row. Back-to-back national championships, 4 straight bids to the college football playoff. It all gets underway Saturday night against Fresno State. Looking forward to that. We'll have a complete breakdown and analysis and preview of the next Titanic game against Texas right here next week on Michigan Podcast. Until then, remember to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, whether you're watching here on YouTube or listening on iTunes or elsewhere. Help us define, when you do that, it helps us define more Michigan fans just like you. So please help us to do that. We really appreciate it. You can also keep up to date on what we think, all things Michigan in between episodes on X at Michigan Podcast. And yes, we'll be there live tweeting during the games. I'm going to warn you though, it's probably not going to be as meltdowny or emotional as it has been every previous year, because I'm in a fulfilled place right now. I'm pretty zen. All right, so I guess you can find out what Zen Steve breaks down during the games. I don't even know myself. I'll find out just the same as you. All right, so follow us there at Michigan Podcast on X. Until the next episode, I am Steve Deace. We'll see you then. Until then, go Blue.